Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
It all starts on a winter night in Juneau, Alaska. About 12 years back, while I was a senior in high school, a few friends of mine were over at my house. This is in a neighborhood on the side of a mountain surrounded by a forest. We were bored with our video games and TV, so we all decided to walk a trail in the woods. This is about 2 a.m. and we weren't worried about running into bears because it was their hibernation period. So we gear up for the 0-degree weather and leave for a trail up the mountain that I had played at as a kid, running through the woods and building forts. So, of course, growing up in it, knowing it like my own home, I wasn't too worried. We had crossed a bridge onto the trail and walked about a half mile when my friend stopped and said he heard something up ahead. I say that it's most likely a deer or something, having seen much of Alaska's wildlife in these woods. So we keep walking, and by this point he's a little nervous, glancing around a lot. My third friend started to say it was probably the Kushtaka, a local legend of a creature that shapeshifts into something that lures you to your death. He freaks out even more, and I tell him I've spent half my life in these woods and haven't seen one thing that was remotely strange. About 5 minutes later, we heard snow crunch under a huge pine tree about 10 yards in front of us. We stopped dead in our tracks, looking up the path towards the tree. I shine the flashlight in that direction and we catch a flash of something moving behind the tree, almost like a bike reflector or something. We start walking slowly away from the tree, back down the trail, not looking away from the tree. Then we see a hand from behind the tree touch the ground, and I stop dead, frozen with fear, not looking away with my flashlight directly on it. It took a few seconds for my friends to realize what I was looking at. Then they saw it too. My friend, who had been scared this whole time, goes nuts and starts putting together words that made no sense. Whatever was behind the trees leaned out to look at us. Its eyes reflected like a dog's from the beam of my flashlight, making its face blurry from the glare. Instantly we all run, not daring to stop. No movement was heard until we had reached the bridge, when one of my friends fell on the ice. That's when I heard it bounding up the path towards us. I shine my light and there it is, running towards us on all fours, half screaming, half howling. It looks almost like a human but seemed to be a lot taller and skinnier, very pale in the moonlight and against the snow. It was completely naked. So I run and jump off the low bridge onto the frozen creek and yell for them to follow me. We ran down the side of the creek towards my neighborhood. I have never run so fast and so far, but I kept on for fear of what I saw. During the entire run I could hear whatever it was running through the woods directly to the right of us, all the way until we got to the street light by a children's park. To this day my friend and I still bring up crazy theories of what we had seen. My other friend, the one who had been so terrified, had never brought it up again.
Okay, so this happened to my wife a couple years ago. We live in southeast Alaska, where there is a mythical creature that is known to roam the forest called a Kushtaka, or otter man. They're similar to the Bigfoot of the Pacific Northwest, but legend has it that if you encounter one, it will shapeshift into someone you know and try to lure you into its lair. My wife was running down a trail with our 2 dogs in a local park. She had made 3 laps and was going on her 4th when our dogs suddenly stopped in the trail and started growling at something off in the woods. Like really snarling. Our dogs are well behaved, so this was very abnormal for them to do. She walked forward looking into the woods trying to see what they were barking at. She rounded a corner and there was a man standing about 40 feet off the trail. She had never seen this man in her life. He was dressed as if he was homeless. His hair was long and dirty. His face was hidden by mats of hair. After standing still for a while, the man knelt down behind a log and out of sight. Suddenly, out flew a bald eagle from where this man had just been standing. As soon as the man and eagle had disappeared, our dogs were completely fine. They returned to their normal happy selves. We spent the next couple weeks researching ottermen and trying to understand more about it. We talked to some local Tlingit elders about the experience. Their interpretation of what happened is that the otterman was trying to teach my wife some kind of lesson. To this day, we have no idea what that lesson could have been.
It was the winter of 1997, I believe. I was living in Ketchikan, Alaska, and serving in the National Guard as an 11B. I loved it. As some may know, a joint task force between all the branches of the military began working on building a road on a nearby island, Annette Island. This was the fulfillment of a 50 or so year treaty the U.S. made with the sovereign Indians in Metlakatla. This was a big project that I believe finished in 2007. Anyways, the Marines spent the first summer building the HQ. It was a series of plywood huts and the framework of a mess hall. When summer ended, the huts were basically just sheds. There was no electricity or running water. Well, me and 5 other members of my unit were called to active duty. We were tasked with living on the island for the winter and protecting the camp. Apparently, the local native youth would hop from island to island vandalizing vacant logging camps and such. This was classified as a training mission for budget purposes. It seemed like it would be a good time. 6 months in the winter on a remote island living in a plywood hut. At first things were somewhat rocky. There was only going to be 4 to 5 us on the island at a time with a weekend rotation every 2 or 3 weeks for 1 or 2 of us. It took a couple months before we had a real generator or propane to cook with, so we subsisted on MRE's 3 meals a day, for quite some time. The worst was that there was only one outhouse in the entire camp, which was placed a few hundred yards from the camp. To make it even worse, the Native Americans, for whatever reason, declared the ground sacred and we were not allowed to relieve ourselves on it. That means if we needed to take a leak or drop the kids off at the pool, we had to march on down to the outhouse, in the Alaskan winter. For the most part, one was loving it. We bonded together, told jokes, played push-up poker, and overall just had a grand time roughing it. Well, to make a long story longer, the heart of winter came and so did the snow, lots of snow. By that time we had these weird heaters that ran on diesel fuel, so we were quite cozy in the huts. However, the one facility left unheated was the outhouse, and not only was it freezing, it was filling up. You see, the bay boat used to bring the porta-potty truck had frozen over. By the 3rd month of our stay, the entire outhouse's contents were dangerously close to rising above the toilet seat. It was disgusting. It was freezing. It became my nightmare to use. Give me a slit trench over an outhouse any day of the week. Even now, thinking of this massive frozen mound makes me cringe. I can still see the steam that would rise from the hole and out the vents of the porta-potty after each use. Anyways, despite the bizarreness of the outhouse, that is not the scary part of this story. One night, as the 4 of us were laying around on our cots ready for bed, a few of us were listening to a book on tape the doc brought with him. I think it was Carl Sagan's Contact. It was either that for entertainment or Art Bell's Coast to Coast radio show, the only English station we could get on the radio. If you don't know who he is, check it out. It is all about aliens, Bigfoot, and other paranormal stuff. Well, we heard noises outside. Now that may not seem scary, but let me tell you, we hadn't heard many noises night or day. There isn't a whole lot of action going on during the winter in the middle of nowhere. At first we thought it might be some native kids coming to goof off and tag the place or set it on fire. It seemed logical. Before we came to this island, we had been given tours of nearby logging camps which were decimated. We were warned that this was what they would do to our camp if we didn't protect it. Well, if it was them, we were ready for them. Wait, no, we weren't. Who am I kidding? We would have wanted to lock and load and go on the offensive if it wasn't for the fact we were there as a training exercise. That meant we didn't have ammunition. We had M16s, but nothing to go in them. Well, we were now no longer laying on our cots. Instead, we are getting dressed and discussing who it is that is going to go investigate with an unloaded rifle. Just then we heard the sounds come to our door. It was not human. We could hear them breathing, loud. Our private first class was the one who had been picked to lead the charge, but he flat out refused. None of us blamed him. We didn't want this to become some Alaskan version of Southern Comfort meets Predator, if you know what I mean. So, we all sat in silence for 10 or so minutes until the huffing and snorting faded away. A few minutes afterwards we manned up and opened the door. We immediately saw in the snow the largest wolf prints I have seen. I swear they were the size of a pie plate. Anything attached to those paws must have been the size of a small horse or at least a dining table. So, about that outhouse. You remember, the one a few hundred yards away. Well, it used to be that if you woke up in the middle of the night and needed to drain yourself, you would take the hike down to the outhouse. Not anymore. Instead, we made a massive patch of yellow snow right next to the door. It became customary to open the door, point to the side, and melt some snow. There was no way on God's green earth anybody was walking all the way to an isolated outhouse with those beasts out in the dark. Our non-commissioned officer in charge, after spending a weekend in Ketchikan, brought back his diving light. This thing was the brightest flashlight I have ever seen. It made the night into day. Anyways, one night we were joking and smoking. We were teasing the private first class because he had to take a dump. It wasn't like he could just hang his ass out the door. That is one thing we didn't want to find come spring when the generals and other dignitaries would be touring the place. Not at all. The private first class was starting to gather up the courage to actually head on down to the outhouse. Good for him. He got so far as to open the door, fully dressed for the freezing temperature. As he was about to walk out, the sergeant flicked on his diving light and pointed it towards the outhouse. He was being nice and was going to light the way. As that light poured down the hill, we could make out the outhouse, and wouldn't you know it, standing next to the crapper was a wolf. Its eyes lit up like two little moons. It stared up towards us. It didn't move. Even though we were a good 300 feet or so from it, the private first class hurriedly backwalked deeper into the hut. The sergeant kept his light shined on this unholy-sized wolf until it started to overheat. That wolf saw us. It knew there was more than one of us. Yet, it did not move an inch. It just stood there staring at us as we stared at it. When the sergeant turned off his diving light, it was still staring at us. It was us who had to break our gazes so that we could close the door. That wolf knew he was in charge. We knew it too. To this day, books on tape give me the creeps.
I've lived in Lake Charles, born and raised, but in 2004, I moved to Alaska to be a youth pastor for a church. I was living in Seward and was invited to come and speak at a church in Fairbanks. About a 9-hour drive. I'm from the south. Not used to it. I got there in January. This was in February. I took out on this trip by myself and had been given tips. This is where you want to stop. This is where you don't want to stop. Gas is real expensive here. Things like that. So I got out just north of Anchorage. North of Wasilla, up in that part of the country. There are people who have said that you stop and pick up hitchhikers. It's just kind of a thing. You don't really do it in Louisiana. Here it's life and death. If you see somebody on the road, you stop. So I saw a man walking north on the road and I pulled over. He got in the truck and I remember distinctly, he had a bit of a body odor smell. He smelled like a campfire. He was unshaven. His name, he told me, was Alex. He spoke with a Russian accent and he said he was a mountain climber, and he said his favorite place on earth was the top of Mount Everest and that he was in Alaska to climb Mount McKinley. So he was on his way to Denali Park. He rode with me in the car for about 2.5 hours, asking me about why I was there. About my calling and feel on my life, those types of things, with me. He gave me tips about driving on the ice, told me not to do things that would have caused error. We came to a town called Trapper Creek. I don't know if you are familiar with it. I was not going to get gas there. It was one of the places I was told not to get gas there because the prices will kill you there. He said, you'll want to stop here because the weather is too bad. Denali is going to be closed, and so I said, okay. He had been in the car for 2.5 hours. We talked extensively about Everest and his plan to see the top of Mount McKinley. Well, we stopped. I got out, started fueling the car. He grabbed his small backpack that he had and I saw him walk into the gas station, the little junction station, which had a little cafe in it. He walked through the doors. When I finished filling up, I went in to use the restroom, pay and grab a bite. I asked the clerk, I said, where's the man that just walked in? And she looked at me and said, you're the only one that has been here for hours. I said, no, a man just walked through these doors. We spent 20 minutes walking around the back of the building. We followed the tracks, the 2 sets of tracks back to the truck. He was nowhere to be found. There was icy wetness where he had been sitting in the truck. The truck still smelled like him, so at that point, I've chalked it up to, was it a ghost or was it an angel? I don't know what, I wouldn't have had enough gas. And when I got to Denali, that gas station was indeed closed.
I was traveling on a local road in the Matanuska-Susitna Valley, about 30 miles north of Anchorage, Alaska. This occurred in the fall of 1998. It was close to midnight when my headlights caught a large, dark figure up ahead. I'm bad at judging distance, but I believe it was maybe 6 car lengths away. I instinctively let off the gas, coasting closer. At first I assumed it was a moose, as the area is infested with them. But no, it was standing upright. Bear, then? No, not a bear. It looked so strange. It was tall enough to be an uncommonly large bear, but far too slender. It looked like it had spikes running down its neck and back. Was I being pranked? All those thoughts ran through my head in a fraction of a second. The car was still coasting closer and I could see more details. It was standing in profile, gazing across the road. I could clearly see its wolf-like muzzle and large, upright ears. The spikes on its back were in fact clumps of fur. Its spine curved in a smooth, very natural-looking way. It was standing in the ditch, inches from the road surface. Because I was focused on its upper body, I do not recall anything about its back legs or if it had a tail. I did see its front legs though. These were very dog-like, hanging awkwardly down and slightly toward its front. Exactly as you'd expect if a dog stood upright. While it clearly had a canine look, there was still something off about it that I cannot articulate. It was perfectly still, and at this point, given the proximity to Halloween, I was quite convinced it was some sort of Halloween prop, because it was clearly not any kind of existing animal. I was deeply impressed and gently stepped on the brakes, intending to stop and examine it closely. Then it turned its head towards me. In the tiny fraction of a second that it took for it to swivel its head, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. The fluidness of its movement removed any and all doubt that this was some kind of prop. It was horribly, terrifyingly alive. The pale, off-white glow of its eye shine in the headlights destroyed any possibility of a human in a costume. I think I sat there gaping at it in shock for a few seconds, the car barely moving by now, but still inching closer. As I was almost upon it, I think it could have leaned forward and touched the car if it had wanted. I had to look up to see its face. Again, I'm a bad judge of such things, but I am 5'4" and it was a hell of a lot taller than me. Tall like a polar bear standing. 7 or 8 feet at least, I really can't say. I snapped out of my trance and slammed on the gas. The car fishtailed and I prepared myself for death by monster, as I was certain I'd end up in the ditch, but the tires caught the pavement and I drove like a complete maniac all the way home. I did not look back.
I've been in Alaska for more than 2 years and I'm stationed in Fort Wainwright. Every so often we go to field missions and where we go is super isolated. Me and a few guys were tasked out to drive down this mountain that we are currently doing our training on and we replied yes, reluctantly because we just want some real food rather than MREs we have been living off of for the past few days. While 2 of the soldiers were ground guiding me and my battle I'll call Knox, out of the runway, we noticed it started to get dark, fast. Being on that mountain is hardly ever any light unless it's from the moon. But just to get a general idea, you could see the northern lights easily. As we drive, Knox is telling me he has to piss really bad, so I just tell him to pull over. As he began to pull over, it got extremely quiet. I felt as if someone punched me in my gut because I started to get this strong sense of something watching me and I started to get goosebumps. I took it with a grain of salt that maybe it was just the MRE making my stomach hurt and the weather making the hairs on my skin stand. But then I felt paranoid, and I've never felt this way before in the field because I've been here numerous times before. As he walks back to the truck, I see the foliage on my right-hand side fall as if weight was being forced on it. I tap Knox's shoulder and tell him to look in my direction. It was a moose, but it looked oddly skinny and the antlers just didn't look normal. Our eyes got huge and he responded, "What is that thing?" I stammered because I wasn't too sure what it was either. He buckled up and pressed the brake, but we heard "help" coming from the direction of the moose. My heart dropped and I felt the heat leave my face and I looked at him asking, "Did you hear that or was it just me?" He replied, "Bruh, I heard that." He laughed nervously and we turned off the truck and shined our headlamps towards the moose's direction. We are 89B, so we carry our standard M4s with us in the vehicle when we are transporting ammo, whether there is anything in the cans or not, just because it's for our safety. Knox and I looked in the cab to just verify we have our weapons on us, and we did. I jumped out of the cab and he followed with our headlamps still on the moose. We walked closer and the word "help" was getting louder and louder. We got a few more feet closer, but not extremely too close to the moose, and it ran back into the wood line, making me and Knox jump. We looked at each other and we were both probably thinking the same thing. Did that moose just cry for help? I told him I was getting cold and he agreed, so we paced back to the truck as fast as possible. As I closed the door, we heard the words, "help," but louder than what it was earlier. I got that gut feeling right after I heard the words and looked into the dark wood line and saw red eyes. I gulped and told him to look, but he put the truck in drive and sped off. We talked for a few minutes about the situation and complete silence followed right after. When we got done with the mission, he sped up the mountain to get back to where the rest of the company was at, and he didn't say a word. He sleeps on the cot next to me and he doesn't speak to anyone about the situation. I'm a bit shaken from the situation myself.
My first encounter with this thing most people call the Mothman was when I was 9 years old, and I remember it clearly like it was yesterday. I was walking back from my uncle's place. I was walking on the sidewalk and I saw this man standing on top of my father's house close to the edge facing west. He was all black. He looked like a man. He stood about 7 or 8 feet tall. I shouted out at him, but he acted like he didn't hear me. I said, "Hey you, who are you?" I kept trying to get his attention. It was like I wasn't there. But when I said, "Hey, you're standing on my house. Who are you?" he looked at me for a few seconds. His face seemed like a normal person's face until it slowly opened its eyelids and I saw a red glow, like his eyes were glowing, not a red light but a glow. I froze and just stared at him. He stood there looking at me for 9 or 10 seconds and looked away and jumped really high and far. I'd say he jumped about 40 feet high and 70 to 80 feet away, and as soon as he seemed to fall down, very long and large wings came out of his back and flapped twice. Just in those 2 flaps he traveled about 100 feet and flew right over the high school. Since that day I never spoke to anyone about it cause I thought I saw the devil. I freaked out so bad I looked out for it every day to make sure it wasn't around. That is my first encounter with that thing. Its body was like a man's and his face is like a man's too, but his eyes are what makes it so scary and weird. Those wings are very long and large. His whole body was all black, like not skin but blackness was covering him. I can't explain. I'm not the only one in my village that saw this thing, but after that there have been many sightings here and in other villages. Even to a point that the thing goes into people's houses while they sleep. That happened to someone I know. I don't know its real name. It's just that all the people here know it as the devil. It comes around and suddenly very bad things start happening. Sometimes it just seems to be watching and nothing happens, or very weird things happen. Some people will experience an ability of some sort for a short time and then suddenly they're back to normal. If you ask me, I think that the Mothman is not a physical being. I think it's an energy formed from somewhere or someplace that takes character when encountered by an individual. When encountered by a person with a certain belief system, the Mothman takes on a form according to the person's point of view of reality. That's one theory of mine to explain its appearance to people. Some people will say it looked like an angel with red eyes. Some will say it looks like a cowboy standing 9 feet tall with glowing red eyes. Others will say it looked like a 6 feet tall man that can walk through walls. So to tell you my thoughts of the name of the thing, I would say maybe its name is Leviathan from the book of Job in the Bible. That would be the closest name I got for it. Why I had so many encounters with it, I have no idea. I do know that there have been encounters in other villages. My second encounter was when I was a teenager. It was a winter night and I was riding on a snow machine with my cousin. We saw a light on the North Hill. We thought it was a snow machine, so we went to go and see who it was. When we got close to the hill, the light disappeared. We were able to see every part of the hill. The light just vanished nowhere in sight, so we were gonna go back home. We turned the snow machine around as my cousin said he had to urinate, so I waited for him to finish. While I was waiting, I saw a black object on the ground, darker than all the other things on the ground. It was getting taller, like something was coming out of the ground. As soon as it reached 7 feet tall or so, it started to come at us fast. I told my cousin to look at the thing. He started to freak out and ran to the snow machine, started it and looked back at it. He yelled, "It's getting very close," so I looked back. It seemed to be 100 feet or so away and coming fast. I screamed to my cousin to take off fast. I was so freaked out I closed my eyes. We were going at least 50 miles an hour on the snow machine. I looked back to see how far we got from it, but that thing was getting closer. I estimated 15 to 20 feet away from us. It was then I noticed the wings, but they were not flapping. It was like that thing was floating over the ground. I couldn't see any eyes on it. No red eyes, just all black. I was screaming to my cousin to go faster, but the thing just got closer and closer like speed was nothing to it. When we reached the village, the thing stopped and turned around. My cousin just kept going fast on the town road, going about 60 miles an hour until we got close to my grandmother's place. He slammed on the brakes as we jumped out of the snow machine and ran into the house. We told everyone inside about what was chasing us. My grandmother said it was the devil and told us to stop being bad kids. The third encounter was when I was 22 years old and at home playing on a Ouija board. I was talking with the board and it said it was the devil, so I foolishly asked it to possess me. It said no. I asked why. It said wrath, so I stopped asking it questions. Suddenly the room started to get cold even with the furnace running. I wrapped myself with my blanket, but I was just getting colder. I also felt the need to look through the window, like something was telling me to. I again felt this urge to look, so I got up, went over to the window and looked outside. I saw a man standing next to the steps of my neighbor's house, just looking at me. I could tell he was staring at me, though I thought it was one of my neighbors, so I went outside to talk to him. I called his name, but he never replied. The street light was shining on him, but I was unable to see his face, like he was covered in a black cloud or some sort of blackness. I kept trying to get him to recognize me, but received no answer from him. I took out my Zippo lighter, which I had just filled with lighter fluid and hadn't used it since. I flicked it on and tried to see his face, but I still couldn't see it. When I got closer, my Zippo turned off as if that thing blew at it. I tried to relight it, but I was unable to do so. Suddenly, I heard a quiet voice saying in my head to back away. So I backed off slowly, not turning my back until I got to the road. When I reached the road, I took off running as fast as I could to my place. I looked out the window to see if it was still there, and it was still staring at me. I started to look for a flashlight so I could see what or who it was. When I found the flashlight, I looked out the window and noticed that it was moving off to the road. I decided to follow it. When I looked closely, it didn't seem to be walking, it was floating away. Dogs would start barking as it passed houses. I was chasing it holding a flashlight, hoping I could get a look at his face. I was too slow to get close, but fast enough to keep up behind it, like it was going slow to make sure I was behind it, but fast enough to stay far ahead of me. It was luring me to him, but I kept chasing it. When it started getting closer to the church, it slowed down and circled the church like it didn't want to get close. It continued to move on, and I just continued chasing it. When we reached the end of the village, I stopped. I felt creeped out, like that thing was trying to get me to go out onto the tundra in the dark. I turned around and quickly walked home. There are other encounters with this thing that many of the people in the world know as Mothman, but here, we know it as the devil or demon. He has been around for a very long time and has been seen by many people here. He has done a lot of things that creep everyone out, like being at a location where someone dies the very next day and on the very exact spot where he was. When he comes around, that means something very bad is going to happen. I don't call him the devil or demon. I disagree with that term. Just call him the black man with red eyes or dark man, because he's surrounded by a blackness or a black cloud. There was an encounter where a guy was out hunting and saw it with a couple of his friends. They tried to get its attention, but it never responded back. They tried shooting next to it, but he never got spooked by the gunshot. There are many other encounters, but these are not mine, so I can't say exactly what happened. I just hear the stories.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.